The California Territory of 1852 promised fortune to those brave enough to seek it, but for Abigail Winters it promised something far more precious, a new beginning. With twin babies and little else to her name, she traveled across a continent, on the strength of a stranger's letters, only to find her promised husband vanished in the gold fever that consumed men's souls. But sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in streambeds or mining claims. They're found in the most unexpected places, when one person sees value where others see only burden. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as it navigated the rutted mountain pass, sending Abigail Winters clutching instinctively at the sleeping infants nestled against her chest. 8-month-old Lily stirred restlessly, while her brother Michael remained, blissfully unaware, his tiny features peaceful despite the jarring journey. Outside the coach window, towering pines gave way occasionally to breathtaking views of the Sierra Nevada mountains, their majesty diminished by Abigail's growing anxiety as they neared their destination. "Last stop before Goldenfield," the driver called out, his voice barely audible over the creaking wheels and the constant jingle of the horses' harnesses. Abigail adjusted her position, wincing as her back protested the movement. 3 weeks of travel, first by steamship from Boston to Panama, then the treacherous crossing of the isthmus, followed by another ship to San Francisco, and finally this bone-rattling stagecoach journey had left her exhausted in ways she hadn't thought possible. Yet beneath the fatigue burned a desperate determination. This had to work. There were no alternatives left. At 26, Abigail had already weathered storms that would have broken others. The daughter of a respected Boston physician, she had defied convention by pursuing an unofficial education in medicine alongside her father's apprentices. Her marriage to Edward Winters, a promising young lawyer, had scandalized Boston society, crossing as it did the boundaries of social class. But Edward had recognized her intelligence and spirit, encouraging her medical interests even as they built their life together. Then came the fever that swept through Boston in the winter of '51. Edward succumbed quickly, leaving Abigail alone and with child, twins, as it turned out. His family, who had never approved of the match, offered no support. Her own parents, having disowned her upon her marriage, remained estranged. With Edward's modest savings depleted by medical bills, Abigail found herself facing destitution. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she shifted position again. She had read it so many times the paper had grown soft along its creases, the handwriting as familiar now as her own. Joseph Blackwell, successful mine owner and merchant in the boomtown of Goldenfield, California, sought a bride from the East. His advertisement in the Boston Chronicle had caught her eye 6 months ago. Established mine owner and merchant seeks educated Eastern lady as wife. Position offers comfort, respectability, and promising future in California's fastest-growing settlement. Correspondence invited from serious candidates. She had answered with trepidation, disclosing her widowed status and the twins immediately. His response had been encouraging. "Dear Mrs. Winters, your candor is appreciated. My position in Goldenfield affords me the means to provide for a ready-made family. The settlement lacks educated women, and your medical knowledge, however informal, would be valuable in a place where doctors are scarce. I offer security and respect with the hope that affection might grow in time." Over the course of 6 increasingly warm letters, Joseph Blackwell had painted a picture of Goldenfield that seemed heaven-sent. A community where her medical knowledge would be valued rather than dismissed, where her children might grow up, with opportunities impossible in the restrictive East, where she could make a new start, unburdened by scandal or pity. The stagecoach crested a rise, and suddenly The valley opened before them. Abigail leaned forward, catching her first glimpse of Goldenfield. Nestled against towering mountains, the settlement sprawled alongside a winding river. Unlike the crude mining camps she had glimpsed earlier in their journey, Goldenfield boasted proper structures, a church steeple rising above the trees, substantial buildings lining what appeared to be a main street, homes scattered across the hillsides. It looked almost civilized, despite the omnipresent scars of mining operations visible along the riverbanks. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, ma'am," the driver called back. "Weather held up better than expected." Abigail nodded her acknowledgement, then turned her attention to the twins who had begun to stir. "Almost there, my loves," she whispered, pressing her lips to Michael's downy head. Almost home. The thought caught her by surprise. When had she begun thinking of this unknown place as home? Somewhere in the endless miles between Boston and California, hope had taken root. Joseph Blackwell's letters, carefully preserved in her traveling case, had offered a lifeline when all other options had failed. He had written of his successful mercantile, of the home he had built on the hill overlooking the town, of his desire for family to fill its rooms. Michael began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching with hunger. Abigail quickly prepared the bottle. She had filled at their last stop, grateful that at least one of the twins would be content when they arrived. First impressions mattered, especially when meeting one's future husband for the first time. The stagecoach began its descent into the valley, the road narrowing as it wound through stands of massive trees. Abigail's stomach tightened with anxiety. What if Joseph Blackwell found her wanting in person? What if the reality of twin infants proved more overwhelming than the idea he had entertained through correspondence? "No," she whispered firmly to herself. "His letters were clear. He understands our situation." The last letter, received just before her departure from Boston, had been particularly reassuring. "I have secured the services of Mrs. Eleanor Franklin, a respected widow, to assist with household matters and the children. Your rooms have been prepared with every comfort I could anticipate. Goldenfield eagerly awaits your arrival, as do I. May your journey be swift and safe." The coach slowed as they entered the outskirts of town, passing simple cabins that gradually gave way to more substantial structures. Men paused in their work to watch the stagecoach pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hunger at the sight of a woman. Abigail drew back slightly from the window, clutching the twins closer. "Stage depot ahead," the driver announced as they turned. Onto the main street, Goldenfield Center was busier than Abigail had expected. Horses and wagons crowded the muddy thoroughfare, while wooden boardwalks teemed with a predominantly male population. A few respectable-looking women moved purposefully between establishments, but they were vastly outnumbered. Signs announced businesses catering to miners' needs, assay offices, equipment suppliers, saloons, and a large structure proudly emblazoned Blackwell's General Mercantile and Supply. Abigail's pulse quickened. There it was, her future husband's establishment, substantial and clearly prosperous. The knot of anxiety in her chest loosened slightly. Joseph had not exaggerated his position, at least. The stagecoach lurched to a halt before a simple building marked Wells Fargo & Co. A small crowd had gathered, eager for news and mail from the outside world. Abigail remained seated as the other passengers, 2 miners and a traveling salesman, disembarked. The driver appeared at the door, extending a hand to assist her. "Careful. Now, ma'am, street's a mess from yesterday's rain." Abigail handed Michael to him carefully, then followed with Lily clutched to her chest. The afternoon sun was blinding after the dim interior of the coach. She blinked rapidly, scanning the faces for someone who might be Joseph Blackwell. According to his letters, he was 42, of average height with dark hair going grey at the temples. No one stepped forward immediately. "Mrs. Winters?" A woman approached, perhaps 50 years old, neatly dressed in a practical brown dress and white apron. I'm Eleanor Franklin. Mr. Blackwell sent me to meet you." Abigail's confusion must have shown on her face, for Mrs. Franklin continued quickly, "He was called away to his claim upriver quite suddenly. There's been some trouble with claim jumpers. He left instructions for me to get you settled at the house." Disappointment washed over Abigail, though she maintained her composure. "I see. When does he expect to return?" Mrs. Franklin's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "He didn't specify, ma'am. Mining business can be unpredictable." She reached for Michael, who the driver still held. "Let me help with this little one. You must be exhausted from your journey." Abigail relinquished Michael gratefully, noticing, as she did so, the curious stares from bystanders. Their gazes lingered on the twins with undisguised surprise and speculation. Clearly, Joseph had not made his impending marriage to a widow with infants common knowledge. "Your trunk?" Mrs. Franklin asked. "Yes, and 2 smaller cases." Abigail indicated her luggage, which the driver was already unloading. "I'll arrange for them to be delivered. The house is just up that hill." Mrs. Franklin gestured toward a 2-story white structure visible on the rise overlooking the town. "Mr. Blackwell's wagon is this way." As they walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched nearby, a tall man emerged from the mercantile across the street. He paused on the boardwalk, his attention caught by their small procession. Even at a distance, his resemblance to the daguerreotype Joseph had sent was striking, the same strong jawline and broad shoulders, though this man appeared younger, his posture more vigorous. "That's Matthew Blackwell," Mrs. Franklin said, following Abigail's gaze. "Joseph's younger brother. He manages the store while Joseph oversees the mining operations." Matthew Blackwell's expression shifted from curiosity to something unreadable as his gaze moved from Abigail to the twins. He nodded briefly in acknowledgement before disappearing back into the mercantile. "He wasn't told about us either, I take it," Abigail observed quietly as they reached the wagon. Mrs. Franklin helped her climb onto the seat, handling both twins with practiced ease as Abigail got settled. "It's not my place to speak on family matters, Mrs. Winters, but no, I don't believe Mr. Joseph has been forthcoming about certain details of your arrangement." The woman's careful phrasing sent a chill through Abigail. "Mrs. Franklin, is there something I should know?" The older woman clicked her tongue, urging the horse forward. "Better to get you settled first. The journey's been long, and these little ones need proper rest." The wagon climbed the hill steadily, offering an expanding view of Goldenfield with each turn of the wheels. Despite her growing unease, Abigail couldn't help but appreciate the settlement's dramatic setting, mountains rising on 3 sides with the river cutting through the valley floor. In different circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. The Blackwell house proved as substantial as it had appeared from below, a proper 2-story home with a wide veranda and glass windows, a rarity in this frontier setting. Mrs. Franklin drove around to the rear entrance, where a kitchen garden showed signs of careful tending. "I've prepared the blue room for you and the nursery adjacent," she explained as she helped Abigail down. "They get the morning sun, which will be pleasant after the cold night." Inside, the house revealed comfortable if somewhat Spartan furnishings, solid. Pieces built for function rather than fashion, though touches of refinement appeared in the form of bound books on shelves and surprisingly fine curtains at the windows. "Mr. Joseph has done well for himself," Mrs. Franklin remarked, leading Abigail upstairs. "Came out in '49 with his brother and staked one of the first claims on Prosperity Creek. Used the initial findings to establish the mercantile while Matthew worked their claim. Now they own 3 producing mines and the largest store in the county. The blue room proved spacious and clean, with a large bed, washstand and rocking chair positioned near the window. The connected nursery contained 2 small cribs and a chest of drawers. These were made special by the carpenter in town," Mrs. Franklin said, nodding toward the cribs. When your letter mentioned twins, Mr. Joseph ordered them straight away. This thoughtfulness reassured Abigail slightly. When did he leave for the mining claim? Mrs. Franklin busied herself with arranging blankets in one of the cribs. 3 days ago. Said it was urgent business that couldn't wait. Yet he knew I was arriving today. Yes, ma'am. He did. Abigail settled Lily in one crib, while Mrs. Franklin placed Michael in the other. Both babies, exhausted from the journey, fell asleep almost immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You must be hungry, Mrs. Franklin said. I've prepared a light supper that can be served whenever you're ready. Thank you, but first I would appreciate candor. Abigail straightened, meeting the older woman's eyes directly. Something isn't right here. I sense you know more than you're saying about Joseph's absence. Mrs. Franklin sighed, her composed facade cracking slightly. It's not my place. I've traveled thousands of miles with infant twins based on Joseph Blackwell's promises. Abigail interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. If there's something I should know, please don't spare me out of misplaced kindness. The housekeeper hesitated, then gestured toward the bedroom. Let them sleep. We'll talk downstairs. In the kitchen, Mrs. Franklin poured tea from a pot, keeping warm on the stove, before sitting across from Abigail at a scrubbed wooden table. Mr. Joseph is a good man in many ways, she began carefully. He built this town alongside his brother, provided employment, even funded the church and schoolhouse. But he has weaknesses. What kind of weaknesses? Gold fever, Mrs. Franklin said simply. It gets into some men's blood worse than others. They can't stop chasing the next big strike, even when they've already found more wealth than they could spend in a lifetime. And Joseph suffers from this affliction? Increasingly so. This past year, he spent more time at the claims and less at home or the store. Matthew manages everything now, though Joseph still owns the controlling interest. She paused, weighing her next words. 2 weeks ago, rumors came of a massive strike in the Trinity Mountains, about 100 miles north. Joseph was distracted after that. When your last letter arrived confirming your travel dates, he seemed almost surprised, as if he'd forgotten. The arrangement entirely, cold dread settled in Abigail's stomach. Are you saying he has abandoned our agreement? Not in so many words. He ordered the cribs, arranged for my services, left funds for household expenses, but 3 days ago he packed supplies and said he needed to address trouble at the North Claim. And you believe he actually went to these Trinity Mountains instead? Mrs. Franklin nodded reluctantly. He took his best prospecting equipment and enough supplies for a lengthy expedition. The North Claim hasn't reported any problems. Abigail stared into her teacup, processing this unwelcome revelation. Does his brother know of his deception? Matthew confronted him before he left. I overheard heated words between them. Mrs. Franklin's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters. If it helps, I believe Mr. Joseph intended to honor his commitment to you when he first initiated your correspondence. But gold does strange things to men's priorities. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Franklin rose, smoothing her apron nervously. That would be Matthew, she said. He mentioned stopping by after closing the store. I should warn you, he was not pleased with his brother's actions. Abigail took a deep breath, gathering her composure. Please, show him in. I believe we have matters to discuss. Heavy footsteps approached the kitchen, and then Matthew Blackwell filled the doorway. Close up, the resemblance to his brother's daguerreotype was even more striking, though Matthew appeared perhaps 5 years younger, his face weathered by sun and wind rather than age. His dark hair showed no grey, and his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, held a directness his brother's image had lacked. Mrs. Winters. He nodded stiffly. I apologize for not greeting you properly in town. Your arrival with children was unexpected. Apparently my arrival at all was unexpected, Mr. Blackwell, despite the very specific arrangements made with your brother. Matthew's jaw tightened. Joseph's behavior is inexcusable. I've come to offer what assistance I can while we determine next steps. Next steps? Abigail raised an eyebrow. Your brother and I have an agreement. Several months of correspondence culminating in my journey across a continent. Are you suggesting that agreement is now void because he's chased after another gold rumor? I'm suggesting that my brother's judgment has become increasingly unreliable and that you deserve better than promises he's demonstrated no intention of keeping. Matthew's bluntness held no malice, only a stark honesty that Abigail found oddly refreshing after months of careful correspondence that had apparently meant nothing. I see. She gestured to the chair Mrs. Franklin had vacated. Please, sit. Tell me exactly where things stand. Matthew settled his large frame onto the kitchen chair, removing his hat and placing it on the table. His hands were those of a working man, strong and calloused despite his position as a merchant. Joseph left for the Trinity diggings 3 days ago after liquidating a significant portion of his ready assets. He claimed he was investigating claim jumping at our north site, but took equipment useless for that purpose. When confronted, he admitted his true destination, but insisted he would return within a month with wealth that would make all other concerns insignificant. Including his commitment to marry me? Yes. Matthew met her gaze directly. I told him it was dishonorable. He said you would understand once he returned successful. Abigail gave a short, incredulous laugh. Understand? I sold everything I owned in Boston. I have 2 infants and barely enough funds remaining for return passage, should that even be possible to arrange. What exactly am I supposed to understand? Gold madness defies rational explanation, Mrs. Winters. Matthew's voice carried the weariness of someone who had witnessed its effects too many times. I can offer you continued accommodation here until we determine a solution. The house legally belongs to both of us, though Joseph has lived in it alone since I built my own place closer to the store. And what solution do you envision, Mr. Blackwell? I cannot simply wait indefinitely for your brother to return to his senses, if he ever does. Matthew hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The simplest would be financial assistance for your return east, though I understand that presents its own difficulties given what you've described of your situation there. There is nothing for me in Boston, Abigail confirmed. No family support, no prospects of respectable employment with 2 infants to care for. From upstairs came the thin wail of a baby waking. Mrs. Franklin, who had been hovering near the stove, moved immediately toward the stairs. I'll tend to them, Mrs. Winters. You 2 continue your discussion. When they were alone, Matthew leaned forward, his expression grave. There is another possibility, though I hesitate to suggest it given the circumstances. Please speak plainly. I've had quite enough of delicate phrasing and half-truths. Goldenfield desperately needs medical knowledge. Our last doctor left for San Francisco 6 months ago. Your letters to Joseph mentioned training with your father. Abigail nodded cautiously. Informally. He was a physician in Boston. I assisted in his practice from the age of 16, though without formal credentials. Credentials matter less here than practical knowledge. People are falling ill from poor conditions, suffering mining accidents, women delivering without proper care. Matthew's intensity surprised her. If you were to establish yourself as a healer, you could create an independent living. I would help with initial arrangements. The proposal was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Abigail had resigned herself to abandoning her medical interests when she agreed to marry Joseph. The prospect of using her knowledge independently kindled a spark of excitement she hadn't felt since Edward's death. The community would accept a female healer. Desperation overcomes prejudice, Matthew replied. Just last month, Jensen's wife died in childbirth because no one with knowledge was available. 2 minors lost limbs to infection that might have been prevented with proper care. They'll accept help from anyone who can provide it. Before Abigail could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Horses approaching at speed, men's voices calling out. Matthew rose, moving swiftly to the window. "Riders from the north claim," he said, his expression darkening. "Something's happened." He strode toward the front door, Abigail following despite herself. On the porch, they found 4 dust-covered men dismounting from lathered horses. Their expressions told the story before words could. "Matthew," the eldest of them said, removing his hat. "It's Joseph. There was a tunnel collapse at the Trinity diggings. They pulled him out alive, but his leg—" The man shook his head grimly. "They're bringing him by wagon. Be here by morning." Abigail watched the blood drain from Matthew's face. Whatever complicated feelings he held toward his brother, the bond remained. "How bad?" Matthew asked hoarsely. "Bad enough. Fevers set in. The man who set the leg wasn't a proper doctor." Matthew turned to Abigail, something like desperate hope in his eyes. "Mrs. Winters, your medical knowledge." Abigail understood immediately. The man who had abandoned her now needed her skills to save his life, perhaps his leg. The irony might have been amusing in different circumstances. "I'll need clean bandages, hot water, and whatever medical supplies are available in town," she said. Decision made. Mrs. Franklin can help prepare a sick room. As the men dispersed to carry out her instructions, Matthew caught her arm gently. "Thank you. I know you have no obligation." "I have an obligation to my conscience and my training, Mr. Blackwell." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Whatever your brother's failings, I won't compound them with my own." Something shifted in Matthew's expression. Respect, certainly, but something more complex alongside it. In that moment, standing on the threshold of a house that should have welcomed her as a bride but now received her as a healer, Abigail felt the first stirring of a different possibility than she had journeyed west expecting. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, it held a glimmer of genuine promise. Dawn broke over Goldenfield with a palette of fiery oranges and reds, as if the sky itself reflected the fever that gripped Joseph Blackwell. The wagon carrying his broken body arrived just after sunrise, a grim procession that drew curious onlookers despite the early hour. Matthew directed the miners to bring his brother into the downstairs parlor, hastily converted to a sick room. Under Abigail's efficient instructions, the damage was worse than reported. Joseph's right leg had been crushed from knee to ankle, the initial setting crude and already showing signs of dangerous infection. His skin burned with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid. When conscious, he rambled incoherently about gold, veins and untold riches just beyond his reach. "He doesn't even recognize me," Matthew said quietly, stepping back from the bed where Abigail examined the mangled limb. "The fever has him," Abigail replied, her voice professionally detached despite the turmoil of emotions beneath. This man, pale, delirious, and gravely injured, bore little resemblance to the confident, established businessman whose letters had promised her security. "I need to reset the leg properly and clean the wound. It will be painful." "Can you hold him still?" Matthew nodded grimly. "Do what you must." What followed tested both their resolve. Joseph's screams echoed through the house as Abigail manipulated the shattered bones back into alignment. Twice he regained enough clarity to curse her, not recognizing the woman who was fighting to save his limb, possibly his life. Matthew's steadying presence never wavered, his strong hands keeping his brother immobile through the worst of the procedure. When it was done, Joseph lapsed into unconsciousness again, the leg splinted and bandaged, the wound cleaned and packed. With the poultices Abigail had prepared from her limited supplies and local herbs, Mrs. Franklin had helped identify. "Will he keep the leg?" Matthew asked bluntly as Abigail washed blood from her hands in a basin. "If we can break the fever and prevent the infection from spreading further." She dried her hands on a clean towel, conscious of the exhaustion settling into her bones after a sleepless night. "The next 3 days will tell the tale." Matthew studied her face, noting the fatigue etched there. "You should rest. Mrs. Franklin can watch him for a few hours. The twins are being admirably tended by Mrs. Peterson from next door. Mrs. Franklin arranged it when we knew Joseph was arriving." His voice softened. "You've done more for my brother than he deserves, Mrs. Winters. Allow yourself some care." As well, the consideration in his tone nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. Abigail nodded, suddenly too tired to argue. "Wake me if his fever worsens or he shows signs of increased pain." She climbed the stairs to the blue room, where the morning sun now streamed through windows, just as Mrs. Franklin had promised. The irony of sleeping in what should have been her marital bed, alone, while her intended husband fought for his. Life downstairs was not lost on her, yet exhaustion overcame all other considerations, and she fell into dreamless sleep almost instantly. When Abigail woke, the quality of light suggested late afternoon. For a disorienting moment she couldn't recall where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the distant sound of activity below. Then memory rushed back. She rose quickly, splashed water on her face from the wash basin, and straightened her rumpled clothing as best she could before hurrying downstairs. She found the parlor-turned-sick room occupied not by Matthew, but by a striking woman in her early 30s, dark-haired and composed, who sat beside Joseph's bed with a ledger open on her lap. The woman looked up as Abigail entered, setting aside her pencil. "Mrs. Winters, I presume. I'm Catherine Wells, the town's schoolteacher." Her direct gaze held intelligence and curiosity rather than the judgment Abigail had come to expect. "Matthew asked me to sit with his brother while he returned to the store for a few hours. Mrs. Franklin is with your children at my home next door. How is he?" Abigail moved to Joseph's side, noting with professional detachment the continued flush of fever on his cheeks. "No worse, perhaps slightly better. He's been quieter this past hour, less delirious in his few waking moments." Catherine rose gracefully. "Matthew speaks highly of your medical skill. He says you saved miners during your journey here." Abigail's hands stilled in the act of checking Joseph's pulse. "He exaggerates. I treated a child with fever at one stage and advised a man with a lacerated hand at another. More medical attention than Goldenfield has seen in 6 months, Catherine observed. Word has spread rapidly. 3 people have already come to the door, asking if the new doctor will see them. I'm not a doctor, Abigail corrected automatically. I simply assisted my father in his practice. Credentials matter less than capability here. Catherine's echo of Matthew's earlier sentiment gave Abigail pause. Especially now that people have heard how you treated Joseph. The miners who brought him in have been talking in town. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Franklin entered, carrying Michael, while Lily toddled unsteadily at her side, taking experimental steps while gripping the housekeeper's skirt. Someone was most insistent on seeing. Her mama, Mrs. Franklin explained with a smile. Both woke from their nap, asking for you. Abigail's heart swelled as Lily spotted her and let go of Mrs. Franklin's skirt, taking 3 wobbly steps toward her before sitting down hard on the floor. The baby's face registered a momentary surprise before she broke into a delighted laugh at her own accomplishment. "She's walking!" Abigail exclaimed, kneeling to scoop up her daughter. "When did this happen?" "Just this morning." Mrs. Franklin beamed like a proud grandmother. "Michael's not far behind. He's pulling himself up on everything he can reach. A moment, the sick room with its grave concerns receded as Abigail absorbed this milestone she had nearly missed. In the chaos of arrival and Joseph's injury, the significance of the twins' development had been overshadowed. A wave of guilt washed over her, followed by fierce determination. Whatever else happened, she would not allow circumstances to rob her of these precious moments with her children. Catherine Wells watched the scene with a thoughtful expression. "Mrs. Winters, might I make a suggestion? My home has a small room off the kitchen that would serve admirably as a treatment space. If you're willing to see patients, you could use it without having to remain in this house with its complicated situation." She glanced meaningfully at Joseph's unconscious form. "It would also place you closer to your children, as Mrs. Peterson has offered to continue helping with their care." The offer caught Abigail by surprise. "That's very generous, Miss Wells, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's hardly an imposition when the arrangement benefits the entire community," Catherine replied practically. "And please, call me Catherine. Formality seems excessive given our circumstances." Before Abigail could respond, Matthew appeared in the doorway, his expression lightening at the sight of the twins. "I see the youngest residents of Goldenfield are making themselves at home." He crossed to where Joseph lay, examining his brother's face with concern. "Any change?" "His fever hasn't worsened," Abigail reported, shifting Lily to her hip, while Michael reached eagerly for her from Mrs. Franklin's arms. "The wound needs redressing, but that can wait until the children are settled." Matthew nodded, then turned to Catherine. "You've made your proposal about the treatment room." "I have," Catherine confirmed. "Mrs. Winters has reservations about imposing, sensible but unnecessary." Matthew addressed Abigail directly. "Miss Wells approached me with this idea at the store. It solves several problems at once, provides you professional space separate from this house, keeps you near your children, and answers the town's pressing need for medical attention." "And you approve of this plan?" Abigail asked, studying his expression. "I think it's the best immediate solution for everyone," he answered carefully. "Joseph will need ongoing care for weeks, possibly months. The community needs medical attention now. Your children need stability." He hesitated, then added with quiet intensity, "And you, Mrs. Winters, deserve the opportunity to establish yourself independently, not as an appendage to my brother's broken promises." His candor, coupled with the unexpected support from these strangers who owed her nothing, pierced the protective shell Abigail had maintained since Edward's death. For almost 2 years she had stood alone, making difficult decisions, enduring hardship and loss, without allowing herself the luxury of vulnerability. Now, faced with kindness where she had expected only judgment, she found herself momentarily speechless. Lily chose that moment to pat Abigail's cheek with a chubby hand, babbling happily, as if offering her own vote in favor of the plan. The simple gesture restored Abigail's equilibrium. "Very well," she agreed, her voice steady once more. "I accept your generous offer, Catherine, but I insist on contributing to household expenses once I've established my practice. We can discuss particulars later," Catherine said with a satisfied smile. "For now, let me show you and the little ones to my home while Matthew stays with his brother." As they prepared to depart, Matthew touched Abigail's arm lightly. "I've ordered medical supplies from Sacramento. They should arrive on tomorrow's stage. Whatever you need for your practice, for Joseph's care, for the twins, you have only to ask." The sincerity in his blue eyes made Abigail wonder how 2 brothers could be so different in their sense of responsibility. Where Joseph had abandoned his commitments at the first hint of gold, Matthew seemed determined to honor obligations that weren't even his to bear. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." His hand fell away, but his gaze held hers a moment longer. "I believe you came to Goldenfield for a reason, Mrs. Winters. Perhaps not the one you originally thought." but a purpose nonetheless. As Abigail followed Catherine toward the neighboring house, Michael now secure in her arms, while Mrs. Franklin carried Lily, she found herself considering Matthew's words. She had journeyed west, seeking security through marriage, only to find that arrangement in shambles. Yet in its place, unexpected doors were opening, the chance to practice medicine openly, to establish herself professionally, to build a life on her own terms. Perhaps, just perhaps, this detour in her carefully laid plans might lead somewhere more promising than she had dared to hope. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that transformed Abigail's life in ways she couldn't have imagined upon her arrival in Goldenfield. The small room off Catherine's kitchen had evolved into a proper medical office, with shelves of remedies, a treatment table crafted by the town carpenter, and even a small waiting area on the back porch where patients could sit out of the elements. Word spread quickly through the mining community. A healer had arrived who actually knew what she was doing. At first they came cautiously. Miners with festering cuts, mothers with colicky infants, elderly residents with aching joints that predicted the weather more accurately than any barometer. Each successful treatment built Abigail's reputation, until her days were filled with a steady stream of patients from sunup to sundown. "Mrs. Winters, you're working yourself into exhaustion," Catherine observed one evening as they sat on the front porch after the twins had been put to bed. The schoolteacher cradled a cup of tea between her palms, watching Abigail's fingers move automatically, rolling bandages even in her moment of supposed rest. "You've seen 14 patients today, checked on Joseph twice, and still managed to spend time with Michael and Lily?" Abigail smiled tiredly. "Old habits. My father never stopped working either." She set aside the finished bandage and flexed her stiff fingers. "Besides, every patient means a few more coins towards securing our future here." "Your future seems increasingly secure by the day," Catherine noted. "Have you seen the looks of respect when you walk down Main Street now? Even Harriet Sullivan nodded to you yesterday, and she's been the arbiter of Goldenfield society since they found the first color in Prosperity Creek." The observation warmed Abigail more than she cared to admit. After years of widowhood in Boston, where her medical interests had been viewed with suspicion and disapproval, the straightforward appreciation of Goldenfield's residents felt like stepping from shadow into sunlight. "Speaking of society," Catherine continued with deliberate casualness, "the Founders' Day celebration is next Saturday. The whole town will attend." She glanced sidelong at Abigail. "Matthew asked specifically if you would be there." Heat rose unexpectedly to Abigail's cheeks. "Did he?" Catherine's expression remained carefully neutral, though her eyes held a knowing gleam. "He's been quite attentive these past weeks, bringing supplies, checking on the twins, escorting you to Joseph's bedside. Matthew feels responsible for his brother's actions," Abigail countered. "Nothing more. Is that why he brought those wooden blocks for the twins? Or why did he fix the loose board on my porch at dawn so it wouldn't wake the babies? Or perhaps why he personally rode to Sacramento to expedite those medical supplies you needed?" Abigail busied herself with her teacup, unwilling to examine the flutter in her chest at the mention of Matthew's thoughtful gestures. "He's simply being kind." "Kind, yes, and I'm interested." Catherine set down her cup with finality. "The real question, Abigail, is whether you return that interest or if you're still bound to the idea of Joseph, despite everything." The directness of the question startled Abigail. In the chaos of establishing her practice and caring for the twins, she had deliberately avoided examining her feelings about either Blackwell brother. Joseph remained bedridden in his home, his fever broken but his recovery slow and complicated. Their interactions during her professional visits remained strictly medical, his behavior alternating between sullen resentment and grudging gratitude depending on his pain levels that day. As for Matthew, the steady support he had provided felt dangerously easy to rely upon. His visits had become highlights in her busy days, especially when he arrived with some small treasure for the twins: a carved wooden horse for Michael, a rag doll with embroidered features for Lily. The way his serious expression lightened when the babies recognized him and crawled eagerly toward his boots filled her with a warmth she wasn't ready to name. "I came to Goldenfield expecting to marry Joseph," Abigail finally said. "That arrangement is clearly void given the circumstances, but I haven't properly considered what might come next. My focus has been survival, not possibilities." Catherine nodded, accepting this answer without pressing further. Well, the Founders' Day celebration would be an excellent opportunity to consider those possibilities. "I happen to have a blue dress that would complement your coloring beautifully with just minor alterations." The following morning brought unseasonably warm weather and an unexpected visitor to Abigail's makeshift clinic. Agnes Miller, the blacksmith's wife, whom Abigail had treated during a difficult labor the previous week, appeared with a basket of fresh-baked goods and a determined expression. "These are for you and the little ones," she announced, setting the basket on Abigail's small desk. "And I've come to watch the twins this afternoon, so you can attend to something important." Abigail looked up from the herbs she was grinding into. "Powder. That's very kind, but I'm not aware of any appointment." "Matthew Blackwell is waiting outside," Agnes interrupted with a meaningful smile. "Says he needs your opinion on some medical supplies that just arrived at the store, but if you ask me, he's been looking for an excuse to get you away from patients for 5 minutes of conversation." Before Abigail could formulate a response, the door opened, and Matthew himself appeared, hat in hand. The spring sunlight caught the angles of his face, highlighting cheekbones bronzed by outdoor work and eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. When he spotted her, Mrs. Winters, he greeted her with a small bow that somehow managed to be both formal and warmly familiar. "I hope I'm not interrupting important work." "Mr. Blackwell, this is unexpected." Abigail wiped herb dust from her hands, suddenly conscious of her work apron and hastily pinned hair. "Mrs. Miller was just explaining that you have medical supplies for my review?" "Indeed." His gaze flicked to Agnes, who was making no attempt to hide her interest in their interaction. "Though I fear I've taken a liberty, the supplies are at the Indian Bar settlement upriver, not at my store. Their camp physician purchased items I thought you might find useful for your practice here, and he's willing to demonstrate their use if you're interested." The mention of Indian Bar piqued Abigail's professional curiosity. The settlement had established a proper infirmary with a qualified doctor, a luxury most mining camps couldn't claim. She had heard rumors of innovative techniques being used. "They're to treat mining injuries. That sounds valuable," she admitted. "But I have patients scheduled this afternoon, and the twins are in excellent hands," Agnes interjected firmly. "My Jenny will help me watch them. She's been begging to play with those babies since they arrived." Matthew's expression remained carefully neutral, though hope flickered in his eyes. "I've brought the buggy. We could be there and back before supper." Dr. Henderson specifically asked to meet the healer everyone at Indian Bar has been hearing about. Pride mingled with professional interest at this revelation. Abigail made her decision, untying her work apron. "Give me 10 minutes to change and check on the twins." The journey to Indian Bar took them along the river road, a scenic route that wound through stands of towering pines and offered occasional breathtaking vistas of the snow-capped mountains beyond. Spring had transformed the landscape, painting hillsides with wildflowers and softening the harsh contours carved by winter storms. In the open buggy, conversation flowed more easily than Abigail had anticipated. Away from the expectations of Goldenfield society and the constant demands of patients, she found herself relaxing in Matthew's company, discussing everything from medical techniques to favorite books to the twins' rapidly developing personalities. Lily, "Reminds me of you," Matthew observed as they followed the river's curve. "She studies everything so carefully before acting. Michael just charges ahead. Consequences be damned." Abigail laughed. "Like his father. Edward was impulsive too. Proposed. To me, after knowing me just 2 weeks." Her smile softened at the memory. "My parents were scandalized, of course. He was from a working family, not their social circle at all. You loved him very much." It wasn't a question, but a statement offered with gentle understanding. "I did." She traced the simple gold band she still wore. "We had 8 months together before typhoid took him. Not nearly enough time, but I have the twins." She glanced at Matthew, curious. "You never married?" A shadow crossed his face. "Nearly. Elizabeth Connors. We were engaged when I decided to follow Joseph West in '49. She was to join me once we established ourselves." He fell silent for a moment, his hands tightening on the reins. "Cholera took her and her entire family before she could make the journey." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly, understanding now the depth of loss she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. "It was years ago," Matthew replied, though his voice suggested the wound remained tender. "Joseph was my only family after that, which is why—" He trailed off, but Abigail understood his meaning. Why he remained loyal despite his brother's flaws, why he shouldered responsibilities that weren't his to bear. "Family takes many forms," she offered, "not always the ones we expect." His gaze met hers briefly, something unspoken passing between them. "Indeed it does, Mrs. Winters." Indian Bar proved to be larger and more organized than Abigail had expected. Less a temporary mining camp than a developing settlement with proper structures and even the beginnings of a main street. Dr. Henderson, a bearded man in his 50s with kind eyes and a Scottish accent, welcomed them warmly to the infirmary. "Mrs. Winters, your reputation precedes you," he declared, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "Your treatment of the McKinney boys' fever was inspired. The family relocated here last week and couldn't say enough about your methods." The professional recognition from a qualified physician sent a flush of pride through Abigail. For the next 2 hours, she absorbed everything Dr. Henderson shared. New techniques for setting fractures, herbal combinations more effective than traditional remedies, simplified surgical approaches that reduced infection risks. He showed her instruments she had only read about in medical journals, demonstrating their use with the patience of a natural teacher. When it came time to depart, he pressed a small case into her hands. "Surgical tools I'm replacing with newer models. Nothing fancy, but better than what you're likely working with. Consider it professional courtesy." The unexpected gift moved her deeply. "Doctor, I can't possibly—" "Nonsense. Medicine out here requires cooperation, not competition." He glanced between her and Matthew with a shrewd assessment. "You found good people in Goldenfield, Mrs. Winters. That's rarer than gold in these parts." The ride back to town was quieter. Abigail lost in thought as she processed all she had learned. The afternoon had reinforced something she had begun to suspect. Her future lay here in California, not as Joseph Blackwell's mail-order bride, but as a healer in her own right. The realization brought both excitement and a strange peace. As they approached Goldenfield with the setting sun gilding the buildings in gold light, Matthew broke the companionable silence. "Abigail." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I'd be honored if you would accompany me to the Founders' Day celebration, as my guest." The careful formality of the invitation couldn't disguise its significance. This wasn't an offer born of obligation or his brother's failings, but something new and tentatively hopeful. Abigail found herself smiling, the weight of past disappointments lightening. as she faced forward toward unexpected possibilities. I would like that very much, Matthew. The Founders' Day celebration transformed Goldenfield from a rugged mining settlement into a vibrant community united in revelry. Main Street had been decorated with bunting and Chinese paper lanterns, a wooden platform erected for dancing, and tables laden with food contributed by every household. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the proceedings as townspeople gathered in their finest attire. Miners in clean shirts with slicked-back hair, merchants in proper suits, women in colourful dresses preserved for special occasions. Abigail smoothed the borrowed blue dress nervously as she stood on Catherine's porch, watching the twins play in the small front yard under Mrs. Franklin's watchful eye. The older woman had insisted on caring for the babies during the celebration, declaring that young folks deserved an evening without little ones underfoot. "You look magnificent," Catherine declared, joining her on the porch. The schoolteacher wore a green gown that complemented her dark hair, which for once hung loose around her shoulders, instead of in her usual practical bun. Matthew won't know what hit him. Abigail was saved from responding by the arrival of the man himself, riding up on his bay gelding. Matthew dismounted with easy grace, securing the horse before approaching the porch. He'd clearly made an effort. With his appearance, clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a crisp white shirt beneath a black frock coat that emphasized his broad shoulders. His expression as he caught sight of Abigail in the blue dress made her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her, momentarily formal before his face relaxed into a genuine smile. "Abigail, you look beautiful." "As do you both," Catherine interjected with undisguised amusement. "Now, shall we proceed to the festivities before you spend the entire evening staring at each other on my porch?" The celebration was already in full swing when they arrived. A fiddle and banjo duo played lively tunes, while couples danced on the wooden platform. Children darted between groups of adults, playing elaborate games of their own invention. The atmosphere hummed with a joy that transcended the hardships of frontier life, a reminder that even in this harsh landscape, humanity found reasons to celebrate. "Miss Wells, Mrs. Winters." Mayor Peterson hurried toward them, his round face flushed with excitement and perhaps a touch too much whiskey. "And Matthew Blackwell, just the man I wanted to see. We're about to begin the ceremonial portion of our celebration." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Given Joseph's indisposition, the town council thought you might say a few words in his place. As co-founder of Goldenfield." Matthew's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Mayor, though I think my brother's role in establishing this town has been somewhat exaggerated in recent tellings." "Nonsense!" Peterson clapped him on the shoulder. "Everyone knows. The Blackwell brothers made Goldenfield what it is today. 10 minutes on the platform." He hurried away to corral other dignitaries. "Joseph always did enjoy taking credit," Matthew murmured, watching the mayor's retreating figure. "Even when our success came despite his recklessness rather than because of it." Abigail laid a hand gently on his arm. "You don't have to maintain the illusion, Matthew. Not for me." His gaze softened as it met hers. "No, I suppose I don't." He covered her hand with his own briefly. "Would you like some punch before I'm called to make a speech I haven't prepared?" They made their way toward the refreshment tables, stopping frequently as townspeople greeted them. Abigail found herself introduced as our healer, with unmistakable pride, receiving thanks from patients she had treated and curious inquiries from those she hadn't yet met. The respect in their eyes contrasted sharply with the dismissive attitudes she had endured in Boston. Mrs. Winters, an elegantly dressed woman in her 40s, approached, her silk dress and carefully arranged coiffure marking her as a member of Goldenfield's small upper class. "I'm Harriet Sullivan. My husband owns the assay office and the Prosperity Hotel." Mrs. Sullivan, Abigail nodded politely, recognizing the name as the society arbiter Catherine had mentioned. "A pleasure to meet you." "I've been meaning to call on you," Mrs. Sullivan continued, her assessing gaze moving between Abigail and Matthew. "Your arrival in our community has been unusual, but I understand you've been making yourself useful with your medical knowledge." The careful phrasing held a hint of condescension that Matthew clearly caught. His posture straightened, protective instinct evident in his stance. "Mrs. Winters has saved multiple lives since arriving," he stated firmly, "including my brother's." "Yes, Joseph." Mrs. Sullivan's expression sharpened with interest. "How is he progressing? There are so many rumors about his condition and about the circumstances of your arrival, Mrs. Winters." Before Abigail could respond, a commotion near the edge of the celebration drew their attention. A wagon had arrived, and seated in it, supported by pillows and clearly still weak, was Joseph Blackwell himself. "Good heavens," Mrs. Sullivan exclaimed. "Speaking of the devil," Matthew's expression darkened as he watched his brother being helped from the wagon by two miners. "Excuse me, ladies. I need to address this situation before he hurts himself further." He strode toward Joseph, leaving Abigail and Mrs. Sullivan watching as the brothers engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation. Joseph gesticulated, weakly but emphatically, while Matthew's posture grew increasingly rigid. "Well," Mrs. Sullivan murmured, "this promises to be more entertaining than the planned festivities." She turned her penetrating gaze back to Abigail. "I understand you came to Goldenfield expecting to marry Joseph after a correspondence courtship." "That was my understanding," Abigail confirmed, maintaining her composure despite the uncomfortable scrutiny. "Circumstances have obviously changed." "Indeed they have." Mrs. Sullivan watched the brothers with undisguised interest. "And now you're attending our Founders' Day celebration on Matthew's arm instead. Quite a reversal of fortune." Before Abigail could formulate a response that balanced dignity with discretion, Mayor Peterson's voice boomed across the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen of Goldenfield, please gather round for the ceremonial portion of our celebration." The crowd shifted toward the platform, where the mayor stood beaming. Matthew had retreated to the edge of the gathering, his expression, troubled as Joseph was, helped toward the platform by his miners. Abigail made her way to Matthew's side. "What's happening?" she asked quietly. "Joseph insists on speaking," Matthew replied, tension evident in his voice. "Says he has an important announcement that can't wait, regardless of his condition." On the platform, Mayor Peterson launched into a florid speech about Goldenfield's founding and growth, embellishing the settlement's 5-year history with the grandeur of an ancient civilization. Abigail barely listened, watching instead the interplay of emotions across Matthew's face as he observed his brother being positioned like a prop at the edge of the stage. "And so, it is my great pleasure to introduce one of our founding citizens, Joseph Blackwell, who has made a remarkable recovery thanks to the medical skills of Mrs. Winters." The crowd applauded as Joseph was helped to the center of the platform. His appearance shocked those who hadn't seen him since the accident. Gaunt, pale, his right leg encased in a complicated splint of Abigail's design. Yet despite his weakened state, his eyes burned with the same intensity she had glimpsed when he spoke feverishly of gold strikes in his delirium. "Citizens of Goldenfield," Joseph began, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. "I stand before you, or rather lean before you." A ripple of appreciative laughter followed his self-deprecating joke, "to make an announcement of great significance to our community's future." Matthew tensed beside Abigail. "He hasn't discussed any announcement with me," he murmured. "This can't be good," Joseph continued, gaining strength as he spoke. "Many of you know I was injured while investigating new mining opportunities in the Trinity region. What you don't know is that before my accident, I confirmed the existence of the richest vein yet discovered in California." An excited murmur swept through the crowd. Joseph raised his hand for silence, clearly enjoying the dramatic moment. I have secured exclusive rights to this claim, and today I announce the formation of the Blackwell Trinity Mining Company. He paused for effect. Initial investors will receive preferred shares at a discounted rate of $100 each. Construction begins next month on a stamp mill that will extract more gold in a day than Prosperity Creek has yielded in a year. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Miners calculating potential profits, merchants envisioning increased trade, wives dreaming of comforts long denied. In the midst of the excitement, Matthew's expression had hardened to granite. "He's doing it again," he said, voice barely audible above the commotion. "Creating a spectacle based on exaggerated claims, taking money from people who can't afford to lose it." "Is there no truth to his discovery?" Abigail asked. "There may be gold in Trinity," Matthew conceded, "but not enough to justify these promises. Not enough to warrant investment from people who need that money for food and shelter." His jaw clenched. "And certainly not enough to justify building a stamp mill when he doesn't even own a proper claim there." On the platform, Joseph was warming to his theme. "The future of Goldenfield lies in expansion. Those who join me in this venture will be the founding fathers of a new era of prosperity." His gaze swept the crowd, then stopped abruptly as he spotted Abigail standing beside Matthew. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation forming behind his eyes. "And speaking of founding families," he continued smoothly, "I'd like to address another matter of significance." He gestured toward Abigail. "Many of you have met Mrs. Winters, who arrived from Boston several weeks ago. What you may not know is that she came at my invitation as my intended bride." A shocked murmur rippled through the gathering. Abigail felt herself flush as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Beside her, Matthew had gone very still. "Unfortunately, my untimely accident prevented our union from proceeding as planned," Joseph continued, his voice taking on a martyred quality. "During my recovery, I've had ample time to consider what's best for everyone involved. Mrs. Winters has established herself admirably in our community, and it would be selfish of me to insist on our original arrangement given my current limitations." "What is he doing?" Abigail whispered, mortification washing over her as her personal situation became public spectacle. "Creating a narrative that serves his purposes," Matthew replied grimly. "As always," Joseph gestured dramatically toward them. "Therefore, with magnanimous spirit, I officially release Mrs. Winters from our engagement and give my brotherly blessing to the obvious attachment forming between her and my brother Matthew." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, and a few good-natured cheers from the miners who had already consumed significant quantities of whiskey. Abigail stood frozen, humiliation and anger warring within her as Joseph transformed her personal disappointment into a public performance designed to cast himself as the noble sacrifice. "Thus," Joseph concluded grandly, "the Blackwell brothers continue their tradition of building Goldenfield's future, Matthew through his care for our newest citizens, and I through the prosperity that the Trinity Mine will bring to all who invest wisely." The crowd erupted in applause, the momentary scandal of Abigail's situation already overshadowed by the allure of gold. Joseph acknowledged the response with a regal nod before being helped from the platform by his miners, his carefully orchestrated appearance accomplished. "I need to speak with him," Matthew said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "before he accepts a single dollar from anyone." Abigail barely registered his words, still reeling from the public display. She felt a gentle hand on her arm and turned to find Catherine beside her, concern evident in her eyes. "Come," the schoolteacher said quietly. "Let's find somewhere away from prying eyes for a moment." They retreated to the relative privacy behind the mercantile, where Abigail finally gave voice to her outrage. How dare he to announce to the entire town that he's releasing me, as if I were a contract he could simply void at his convenience, after he abandoned our arrangement without a word. It's unconscionable, Catherine agreed, her expression thunderous. But entirely in character for Joseph Blackwell. He's never accepted responsibility for his failures if he could spin them into someone else's problem, or better yet, his own virtue. And what of Matthew? Abigail pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. Joseph has placed him in an impossible position as well, publicly declaring his blessing for an attachment that... She broke off, unable to articulate the complex emotions that had been developing between herself and Matthew. That is genuine, if unspoken, Catherine finished gently. The whole town has seen it growing, Abigail. Joseph merely stated aloud what others have already observed. Before Abigail could respond, raised voices from the direction of the celebration caught their attention. They exchanged concerned glances before hurrying back toward the gathering, where a tense scene was unfolding. Matthew stood facing Joseph, who remained seated in his wagon. A crowd had gathered around them, the festive atmosphere replaced by the tense anticipation that accompanies public conflict. Nothing but empty promises and exaggerated claims, Matthew was saying, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. You can't take these people's money based on a fantasy. It's not fantasy, brother, Joseph retorted, his weakened condition doing nothing to diminish his theatrical flair. I've seen the color with my own eyes. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, just like the Nevada silver strike that never materialized, or the coastal shipping venture that lost every investor's money. Matthew's frustration was palpable. How many times will you sacrifice others' security for your delusions? Joseph's expression hardened. I built this town while you counted beans in the store. Don't presume to lecture me on what these people need. He raised his voice to address the watching crowd. Who would you rather believe? The man who saw the first gold in Prosperity Creek, or his cautious brother who would have us all still? Farming potatoes back east? The crowd shifted uncomfortably, torn between Matthew's reliable presence in their daily lives and Joseph's seductive vision of instant wealth. Mayor Peterson attempted to intervene, his earlier joviality replaced by nervous diplomacy. Gentlemen, please, this is a day of celebration, not discord. Joseph ignored him, focusing instead on Abigail, who had moved to stand at the edge of the gathering. And you, Mrs. Winters, so quick to transfer your affections to my brother while I lay suffering. Perhaps Boston widows are more pragmatic than sentimental. The cruel insinuation sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the crowd. Abigail felt the weight of judgment in the stares now directed at her. The newcomer, who had apparently abandoned one brother for another while he recovered from near-fatal injuries. Matthew took a step toward Joseph, his expression dangerous. Apologize, now, for speaking the truth, Joseph countered. Everyone can see what's happened. I offered her security as my wife. When that became temporarily inconvenient due to my injury, she found a substitute in you. The ugly accusation hung in the air, threatening to undo all the respect Abigail had earned through weeks of dedicated service to the community. She stepped forward, her head high despite the mortification burning in her chest. Mr. Blackwell, she addressed Joseph directly, her clear voice carrying across the hushed gathering. You wrote offering marriage, then abandoned that commitment at the first rumor of gold without so much as a farewell note. I arrived to find you gone, your promises empty. It was your brother who offered me a professional opportunity, not romantic overtures, while you chased fantasies that nearly cost your life. Her directness startled the onlookers, women exchanging glances of surprise at her boldness, while men shifted uncomfortably at the public airing of private matters. Furthermore, Abigail continued, anger overcoming her usual reserve, you have not paid a single cent for the medical care that saved your leg, nor contributed to the housing and Feeding of the twins you claim to welcome in your letters. If anyone has been pragmatic rather than sentimental, sir, it is you. Joseph's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. How dare you? No, Joseph, Matthew interrupted, moving to stand beside Abigail. How dare you use this celebration to raise money for another doomed venture, then attack the very person who saved your life when you face opposition? If you have a shred of decency left, you'll apologize to Mrs. Winters immediately. The tension between the brothers crackled like lightning before a storm. The crowd watched, transfixed by the public rupture between Goldenfield's founding siblings. Joseph's gaze darted between Matthew's resolute expression and the increasingly uncomfortable faces of potential investors, calculation visible in his eyes. Perhaps I spoke hastily, he conceded finally, though no actual apology crossed his lips. My injury has made me irritable. He turned to address the gathering with renewed vigor. Let's put aside personal matters. Who among you wishes to secure your family's future through the Trinity opportunity? I have prospectus documents in my wagon and can accept initial investments immediately. Several miners moved forward eagerly, the allure of quick wealth overwhelming the unpleasant scene they had just witnessed. Matthew watched with dismay as Joseph's theatrical performance succeeded in refocusing attention on gold rather than character. He'll take every penny they can spare, he said quietly to Abigail, and they'll never see it again. Abigail observed the scene with growing alarm. Honest, hard-working people prepared to risk their security on Joseph's golden promises. In that moment, she recognized that her own public humiliation was merely a symptom of a larger threat. Joseph. Blackwell's return to Goldenfield endangered not just her reputation, but the financial stability of an entire community that had welcomed her and her children with unexpected warmth. The celebration continued around them, but the festive atmosphere had fractured, replaced by competing currents of excitement and tension. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, illuminating the changed dynamics of the gathering, Abigail realized that the tentative new life she had begun to build stood on increasingly unstable ground. The aftermath of the Founders' Day celebration rippled through Goldenfield like aftershocks from an earthquake. By midweek, Joseph had collected investments from 15 miners, 7 shopkeepers, and even Reverend Collins, who contributed the church building fund in hopes of tripling it for a proper steeple. The Trinity Mining Company had become the talk of the settlement, with Joseph holding court daily from a makeshift office in the Prosperity Hotel lobby despite his still healing leg. Abigail observed these developments with growing concern as she tended to her patients. The number of people seeking her medical services had noticeably decreased, not dramatically, but enough to indicate that Joseph's public insinuations had tarnished her standing in some circles. Mrs. Sullivan cancelled her appointment again, Catherine noted, as she joined Abigail for tea in the garden behind her home. The twins played nearby on a blanket, Michael determinedly stacking wooden blocks, while Lily practiced her newfound walking skills, toddling unsteadily between the women. That's the third cancellation from prominent families this week, Abigail sighed, watching Lily's concentrated expression as she navigated the short distance to Catherine's chair. I expected some fallout, but I hadn't anticipated how thoroughly Joseph would weave his narrative. According to Mrs. Franklin, he's telling people I abandoned him in his time of need, seduced by his brother's more stable prospects. Convenient how he omits the part where he abandoned you first, Catherine remarked dryly, reaching down to steady Lily as she grabbed the chair for support. Have you spoken with Matthew since the celebration? Briefly. Abigail's expression softened involuntarily. He came yesterday to check on us, but seemed preoccupied. The mercantile is suffering as people divert funds to Joseph's venture. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Agnes Miller, hurrying through the garden gate with unusual urgency. "Mrs. Winters, thank heaven you're home." The blacksmith's wife clutched her shawl around her shoulders despite the warm day. "It's Joseph Blackwell. There's been an incident at the hotel." Abigail was already rising, medical instincts overriding. "Personal complications." "What happened?" "He collapsed during a meeting with investors. They carried him to his room, but he's burning with fever and delirious." Agnes twisted her hands anxiously. "Dr. Henderson is away at Indian Bar, and Matthew sent me to fetch you, though he said to tell you he'd understand if you refused." Catherine was already gathering the twins. "Go. I'll watch the children." Abigail hesitated only briefly before retrieving her medical bag. Whatever her feelings about Joseph, she couldn't ignore a medical emergency. "Tell me his symptoms as we walk." The scene at the Prosperity Hotel bordered on chaotic. A crowd had gathered in the lobby, buzzing with speculation. Several miners who had invested in the Trinity venture paced anxiously, while Reverend Collins led a small prayer circle in one corner. Mayor Peterson stood at the foot of the stairs, attempting to maintain order. "Mrs. Winters." Relief washed over his round face as he spotted her. "Thank goodness. Matthew is with him upstairs, second door on the right." The mayor's use of her professional title, rather than dismissing her as the widow or Joseph's intended, suggested her medical reputation still carried weight, despite recent events. Abigail climbed the stairs with dignified purpose, Agnes following close behind. She found Joseph thrashing weakly on a hotel bed, his face flushed with fever, mumbling incoherently about gold veins and stamp mills. Matthew stood by the window, his expression a complex mixture of concern and resignation. He straightened when Abigail entered. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Abigail set her bag on the bedside table. "What happened?" "He was fine this morning, animated even. Then during a meeting with new investors, he suddenly became confused, couldn't finish his sentences. When he tried to stand, his injured leg gave way." Matthew ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "By the time we got him upstairs, the fever had taken hold." Abigail examined Joseph methodically, checking his pulse, rapid and thready, his temperature dangerously elevated, and finally, the leg itself. What she found when unwrapping the bandages made her breath catch. "Bone infection," she announced, grimly. "I feared this might happen. The initial injury was severe, with significant contamination from the mine collapse." She probed gently around the inflamed area, noting Joseph's reflexive flinch, even in his semi-conscious state. "The infection has been smoldering, probably for days." He ignored the warning signs. "Can you treat it?" Matthew asked. Abigail hesitated, weighing professional honesty against false hope. "I can try to draw out the infection, reduce the fever. But if it's spread to the bone marrow, as I suspect..." She left the implication hanging. "You're saying he could lose the leg, or worse." She met Matthew's gaze directly. "Bone infections can turn deadly very quickly." Understanding passed between them. Joseph's life hung in the balance, a reality that transcended their personal complications. Abigail turned to Agnes, who hovered anxiously in the doorway. "I need hot water, clean cloths, whiskey for sterilization, and all the willow bark Mrs. Franklin can find. Also, send someone to my clinic for the special drawing poultice I prepared last week. Catherine knows where it's stored." As Agnes hurried to fulfill these requests, Abigail began preparing the area for treatment. Matthew assisted silently, following her directions without question. Their movements fell into an unconscious rhythm, developed through weeks of professional interaction. "The investors are in a panic downstairs," Matthew said quietly as they worked. "Joseph convinced them to commit far more than they could afford, promising returns within a month. They believed such unrealistic claims." Gold fever. Matthew's mouth twisted. Logic holds no power against it. Now they fear losing everything if he doesn't recover to guide the venture. A horrible suspicion formed in Abigail's mind. Matthew, is there actually a Trinity mining claim? A real one, legally registered? His hesitation told her everything. There's gold in the region, certainly. Joseph may have staked something informally. But a proper claim with development potential? No. The full implications staggered her. Joseph hadn't just exaggerated prospects, he'd fabricated an entire venture, taking hard-earned money from people who trusted the Blackwell name. If he died from this infection, those investments would die with him, leaving investors with nothing but worthless paper. And if he lived, the charade would eventually collapse when the promised returns failed to materialize, with equally devastating consequences for Goldenfield's stability. Agnes returned with the requested supplies, followed by Catherine bearing the drawing poultice. Abigail fell into the focused state that had always characterized her medical work, her personal feelings about the patient set aside in service of healing. Hours passed as she battled the infection ravaging Joseph's system. She lanced and drained the worst areas, applied the powerful drawing poultice, and administered willow bark tea when he was conscious enough to swallow. Throughout the grueling process, Matthew remained at her side, providing steady hands and quiet support without complaint. Midnight came and went. The hotel gradually quieted, as even the most concerned investors retired to their homes or lodgings. Only Reverend Collins remained in the lobby, maintaining his vigil of prayer. Upstairs, Joseph finally slipped into a more natural sleep as the willow bark brought his fever under tentative control. "You should rest," Matthew told Abigail as she finished applying fresh bandages. "I'll watch him until morning." She shook her head, removing her apron. "The crisis isn't past. I'll rest here." She gestured to a small settee in the corner of the room. "If he worsens during the night, immediate intervention will be crucial." They arranged a makeshift bed on the settee, Matthew insisting she take his coat as an additional blanket against the night chill. As Abigail settled herself, exhaustion washing over her, a question that had nagged at her consciousness throughout the evening finally found voice. "Why did you send for me?" she asked quietly. After what Joseph said at the celebration, it would have been understandable to seek help elsewhere. Matthew considered the question from his position in the chair beside his brother's bed. "Because you're the most qualified healer within 50 miles, he answered simply. "And because regardless of his behavior, you took an oath to heal that I knew you wouldn't abandon lightly." The straightforward recognition of her professional ethics touched Abigail deeply. "Few men would understand that," she murmured. "Few? Men have watched you work," he replied, his gaze steady in the lamplight, "or seen the calling that drives you beyond personal considerations." The moment stretched between them, waited with unspoken understanding. Then Joseph stirred restlessly, breaking the connection. Abigail turned toward the settee, seeking the sleep she would need for the challenges ahead. "Rest well, Abigail," Matthew said softly. "Tomorrow will bring its own trials." His prediction proved accurate. Dawn revealed Joseph's condition, stabilized but not improved, the infection still threatening despite their interventions. More concerning were the developments below, where investors gathered in anxious clusters, their fear palpable as rumors of Joseph's condition spread. By mid-morning, the situation had deteriorated further. 2 miners who had invested their entire season's earnings demanded to see Joseph, becoming belligerent when refused. Mayor Peterson arrived looking harried, pulling Matthew into a corner conference that left both men grim-faced. "What's happening?" Abigail asked when the mayor departed. Matthew glanced toward Joseph's unconscious form before answering. The promised funds for initial equipment purchases were due to be released today. Without Joseph's signature, everything's in limbo. Men who quit their claims to work for Trinity are threatening violence if they're not compensated. Can't you sign in his place? As his brother? I'm not a partner in Trinity, deliberately so. Matthew's expression hardened. Joseph kept me removed. From the business specifically to prevent oversight. Abigail absorbed this information, her medical mind cataloguing facts with clinical precision. The infection remains severe. Even if he regains consciousness, he won't be capable of making business decisions for days, possibly weeks. By which time the situation below could become explosive, Matthew concluded. These men have families to feed, dreams they've sacrificed for. They won't wait patiently while their futures hang in balance. The truth crystallized between them. Joseph's recklessness had created a crisis that threatened more than individual investments. The entire stability of Goldenfield hung in precarious balance, with violence and financial collapse looming on multiple fronts. We need to address them directly, Abigail said, decision forming as she spoke, not with false reassurances, but with a concrete plan that offers both truth and hope. Matthew studied her with sudden intensity. You have something in mind. Perhaps. She straightened her shoulders, professional resolve replacing exhaustion. But first, I need to speak with Catherine and Mayor Peterson. Can you maintain things here for an hour? He nodded, trust evident in his expression. Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity as Abigail conferred with Catherine, dispatched urgent messages through Agnes Miller, and finally met with Mayor Peterson and the town council in the hotel's small dining room. By midday, the lobby had been cleared and transformed into an impromptu meeting hall, with Joseph's anxious investors assembled on hastily arranged chairs. Abigail stood on the small staircase landing, conscious of the skeptical gazes directed her way. These were men unaccustomed to taking direction from a woman, yet their desperation had brought them here, willing to listen at least briefly. Beside her stood Matthew, Catherine, Mayor Peterson, and surprisingly, Harriet Sullivan, whose presence lent social authority to the proceedings. Gentlemen, Abigail began, her voice clear and steady. As Mr. Blackwell's physician, I must inform you that he faces a prolonged recovery. The infection in his leg is severe, requiring weeks of treatment with no guarantee of full restoration. A murmur of discontent rippled through the assembly. One miner stood, his face flushed with anger. What about our investments? The equipment orders were supposed to be placed today. The Trinity venture, as described to you, cannot proceed on the timeline promised, Matthew stated bluntly. My brother's condition aside, certain aspects of the project require reassessment. This diplomatic phrasing provoked immediate uproar. We were guaranteed returns, shouted one investor. I put in my family's entire savings, called another. Mayor Peterson stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. Please, allow Mrs. Winters to continue. There is a proposal that may address your concerns. When relative order had been restored, Abigail continued with the plan she had formulated during the night. The Trinity location has gold potential, but developing it properly requires more than one man's vision. It needs community investment, professional management, and medical support for the workers. She gestured to the small group beside her. What we propose is a transformation of the Trinity venture into the Goldenfield Cooperative Mining Association, with distributed ownership among all current investors, professional management by Matthew Blackwell, and a percentage of proceeds allocated to establishing a proper infirmary at the site. Catherine stepped forward with a stack of documents. As the town's notary as well as schoolteacher, I've prepared articles of association that protect every investor's original stake while creating sustainable operations. Harriet Sullivan nodded approvingly. My husband has reviewed the financial structure and vouches for its soundness, a significant improvement over the original arrangement. The investors exchanged uncertain glances, hope warring with skepticism. How do we know there's really gold there? One called out. We only have Joseph's word. A fair concern, Matthew acknowledged, which is why I've arranged for an independent SAA from Sacramento to evaluate the site before operational funds are committed. If the claim proves insufficient, all investments will be returned through the sale of alternative Blackwell holdings. This last declaration sent a shock through the room. Matthew was essentially pledging his own assets as security against his brother's promises, a guarantee no one had expected. "You'd do that?" asked Jensen, a grizzled miner who had invested heavily. "Risk your own property for your brother's scheme?" Matthew met his gaze steadily. "The Blackwell name has always stood for integrity in Goldenfield. I intend to ensure it continues to do so, regardless of recent complications." The mood in the room shifted perceptibly. Men who had arrived angry and frightened now leaned forward with cautious interest, asking specific questions about the cooperative structure, profit distribution, and timeline. Catherine circulated with the articles, explaining legal protections built into the new arrangement. As Abigail observed the transformation, a warm hand closed gently around hers. She turned to find Matthew looking at her with undisguised admiration. "This solution was entirely your creation," he said quietly. "You've potentially saved this town from disaster." "We've saved it together," she corrected. "My idea would mean nothing without your willingness to back it with your own resources, a considerable risk." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "Some things are worth risking everything for." The weight of his words, the warmth in his eyes, told Abigail he wasn't speaking merely of financial matters or community stability. Before she could respond, Mayor Peterson approached, beaming with relief. "Remarkable turnaround," he declared, oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "Nearly everyone has signed the articles. The cooperative will proceed with Matthew as managing director." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "What about Joseph? How will he react when he learns what's happened?" It was a legitimate concern. Joseph's temperament suggested he would hardly welcome the transformation of his grand scheme into a community venture, regardless of its practical necessity. "He has two choices," Matthew replied firmly. "Accept the new arrangement or face investors alone with empty promises he can't fulfill. His medical condition leaves him little leverage to object." Abigail glanced toward the stairs, considering the man whose letters had brought her across a continent. "He'll adapt," she predicted. "Joseph's talent has always been reinvention, finding ways to claim victory even in circumstances not of his making." The day's events had demonstrated something profound, not just about Joseph, but about Abigail herself. She had arrived in Goldenfield, seeking security through marriage, only to discover a stronger foundation in her own capabilities and the community connections she had built through service. As the meeting concluded and the investors dispersed, with renewed hope, Abigail found herself standing with Matthew on the hotel's front porch, watching the afternoon sun illuminate Main Street. The town looked different somehow. Not just a place she had landed by circumstance, but a community where she had established genuine roots. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Matthew turned to face her, his expression unusually vulnerable. "That depends largely on you, Abigail. The cooperative will stabilize the immediate crisis, but there are longer-term matters to consider, such as whether you see your future in Goldenfield permanently." His voice remained steady, though the intensity in his eyes betrayed deeper emotions. "Whether the practice you've built here fulfills your professional aspirations, whether there might be room in your life for—" He hesitated, then finished with simple honesty, "For me." The directness of the question took her breath momentarily. Yet instead of uncertainty, Abigail felt a surprising clarity. The past weeks had stripped away pretense and convenience, revealing genuine connection where she had least expected it. "I came to California seeking a practical arrangement," she said carefully. Security for my children through marriage to a man I knew only through letters. Matthew nodded, his expression guarded as he waited for her to continue. What I found instead was the opportunity to build something meaningful on my own terms, a medical practice, respect for my knowledge, a community where my children can thrive. She met his gaze directly. And a man whose integrity and support have never wavered, even in the most difficult circumstances. Hope flickered in his eyes. Does that man have reason to hope his feelings might be returned? Abigail took a step closer, her natural reserve giving way to newfound courage. He has every reason, Matthew. The question isn't whether there's room in my life for you, but whether you're certain you wish to take on a ready-made family and a wife with professional ambitions. His smile transformed his serious features, years of responsibility momentarily lifted from his shoulders. I've never been more certain of anything, he said simply. Your children already own a piece of my heart, and your professional ambitions are precisely what Goldenfield needs, what I admire most about you. He took her hands in his, the gesture both respectful and intimate. I'm not offering to rescue you, Abigail. You've proven beyond doubt that you need no rescuing. I'm offering partnership in every sense of the word. Around them, Goldenfield continued its daily rhythms. Miners heading toward evening meals, merchants closing shops, children playing in the lengthening shadows. Life in this frontier town remained challenging and uncertain. Yet for the first time since Edward's death, Abigail felt the glimmer of something she had thought lost forever. Not just security or stability, but the profound connection of hearts aligned in purpose and mutual respect. Partnership, she repeated softly. I think I would like that very much. Autumn painted the Sierra foothills in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as Goldenfield prepared for its first harvest festival. 6 months had transformed both the settlement and the lives of those who called it home. The Goldenfield Cooperative Mining Association had proven more successful than anyone anticipated, not through the immediate riches Joseph had promised, but through steady returns built on sound management and realistic expectations. The Trinity site had yielded moderate but consistent gold deposits, enough to provide investors with modest monthly dividends rather than the overnight fortune Joseph had promised. More importantly, the cooperative structure had created stable employment for dozens of miners who might otherwise have drifted from claim to claim, chasing elusive strikes. With regular income, families had put down roots, building permanent homes to replace hastily constructed cabins. A small school had opened in September, with Catherine Wells presiding over 23 students, ranging from 5 to 16 years of age. The town itself had evolved, adding 15 new structures since spring, including a proper infirmary. On the edge of Main Street, a newly constructed boardwalk now spanned the length of Main Street, keeping pedestrians above the mud during rainy seasons. The Prosperity Hotel had added a second floor with proper glass windows imported from Sacramento, and plans were underway for a permanent courthouse to replace the temporary structure that had served since the town's founding. Inside the modest but well-equipped infirmary, Abigail completed her final examination of the day, a miner's hand lacerated during equipment maintenance, now neatly stitched and bandaged. Keep it clean and dry for 3 days, she instructed, handing him a small packet. Apply this salve when you change the bandages, and no heavy lifting for at least a week. Yes, ma'am. The young man nodded respectfully. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell. Without your care, I'd likely have lost these fingers like Jenkins did last year. Just following proper medical protocol, Abigail replied, though the comparison reminded her how dramatically healthcare had improved in Goldenfield in just 6 months. When she first arrived, miners routinely lost limbs to infections that could have been prevented with basic care. Now, with regular clinics and improved hygiene practices throughout the camps, such tragedies had become increasingly rare. The name still caught Abigail by surprise sometimes, though she had carried it for nearly 4 months now. The simple ceremony in July had united more than just two people. It had formally blended a family that had been forming since her arrival in March. The twins, now 14 months old, had taken to calling Matthew Papa, a development that never failed to bring a look of quiet joy to his face. Their wedding day remained vivid in her memory, not an elaborate affair, but a meaningful one. The ceremony had taken place in the churchyard beneath flowering apple trees. With most of Goldenfield in attendance, Catherine had stood beside her as maid of honor, the twins toddling down the improvised aisle strewn with wildflowers, Lily clutching a small bouquet that she had promptly tried to eat. Reverend Collins had performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, and even Harriet Sullivan had shed a discreet tear during the exchange of vows. As the miner departed, Abigail moved to the large windows overlooking the street. The late afternoon sun gilded the busy scene, wagons loaded with harvest bounty, children playing improvised games, miners and merchants mingling in easy conversation. Prosperity Creek still yielded gold, but the settlement had diversified beyond mining alone, with growing agricultural ventures in the fertile valley establishing more sustainable foundations. She spotted familiar faces in the street. Agnes Miller and her husband Thomas discussing something with animated gestures, probably plans for the smithy expansion they'd been saving toward. The Jensen family passed by with their newborn, their first child delivered safely under Abigail's care just 2 weeks earlier. Further down, several miners from the Trinity Cooperative unloaded supplies from a wagon, their easy camaraderie evidence of the stable work relationships that had replaced the desperate competition of individual prospecting. The bell above the door chimed, announcing Catherine's arrival. The schoolteacher entered with an armful of books and her customary energetic presence. The past months had brought changes to her life as well. Her school had quickly become the heart of community pride, and rumors circulated that the handsome widower who had recently arrived to establish Goldenfield's first newspaper had been calling on her with increasing frequency. "Finished for the day?" she asked, depositing her burden on a nearby table. "I've brought those medical texts you requested." From Sacramento. The stage driver complained about the wait the entire journey. Abigail smiled, examining the volumes with appreciation. "These are magnificent. Dr. Henderson will be thrilled when he arrives next week for the consultation clinic." The monthly arrangement with the physician from Indian Bar had been her innovation, bringing specialized medical knowledge to Goldenfield while allowing her to expand her own training. Their professional collaboration had flourished into mutual respect, with Dr. Henderson increasingly treating her as a colleague rather than an apprentice. Twice now, he had even sent patients to her with notes requesting her specific treatments for certain conditions where her methods had proven more effective than conventional approaches. "How are preparations for tomorrow's festival?" Abigail asked, carefully shelving the precious medical texts. Catherine's expression brightened. "Nearly complete. The dancing platform is installed, food contributions are organized, and Mayor Peterson has mercifully trimmed his opening address to under 15 minutes. She adjusted a stack of bandages on a nearby shelf, aligning them with precision. "The children have prepared a harvest song to perform. You should see little Amy Peterson. She takes her role as lead singer with utmost seriousness." She hesitated, then added with studied casualness, "Joseph has confirmed he'll attend." Abigail nodded, absorbing this information without surprise. Joseph's recovery had progressed slowly but steadily through the summer. The infection had eventually been conquered, though his leg would never regain full function. More remarkable than his physical healing had been his adaptation to changed circumstances. Once it became clear the cooperative would succeed without his leadership, he had maneuvered himself into the role of founding visionary, claiming credit for its innovative structure. Will that be uncomfortable? Catherine asked when Abigail didn't immediately respond. This will be his first public appearance since he relocated to the new cabin. I don't anticipate problems, Abigail replied, continuing her end-of-day organization. Joseph and I have reached an understanding of sorts. We acknowledge each other's existence politely and maintain sufficient distance to avoid actual conversation. Catherine laughed at this diplomatic description. Only you could make such an awkward arrangement sound completely reasonable. Her expression softened. Though I'm glad he accepted the cooperative's offer of the cabin and stipend. Despite everything, he is Matthew's brother. Matthew's the one who insisted, Abigail noted, a hint of pride in her voice. Family obligations matter to him, even when complicated by history. The sound of running footsteps on the porch interrupted their conversation. The door burst open to admit Michael, his chubby legs carrying him at remarkable speed toward Abigail, with Mrs. Franklin following more sedately behind, carrying Lily. "Mama!" Michael exclaimed, colliding with Abigail's skirts. "Pa, horse! Big horse!" "Is that so?" Abigail lifted him into her arms, interpreting his limited vocabulary with the ease of practice. "Did Papa show you a horse?" "Not just any horse," Mrs. Franklin explained as she entered with Lily, who immediately reached for her mother. "A magnificent Belgian draft. Matthew brought home a new delivery horse for the mercantile." He took Michael up on the saddle briefly. "Quite the adventure for young Master Blackwell here." The twins had thrived in the mountain air and stable environment of the past months. Both now walked confidently, their vocabularies expanding daily, their distinct personalities ever more apparent. Michael approached life with boundless enthusiasm and physical daring, while Lily observed everything with thoughtful consideration before acting. Together they formed a formidable team, already inseparable in their small adventures. "Matthew's at the store?" Abigail asked, settling Lily on her hip while keeping a firm grip on Michael, who was attempting to demonstrate his horse-riding experience through vigorous bouncing. "Finishing inventory before tomorrow's closure for the festival," Mrs. Franklin confirmed. "He asked if you'd join him for supper at home when you're finished here." The older woman had continued as their housekeeper after the marriage, her practical presence a stabilizing force in their busy household. Catherine gathered her remaining belongings. "I'll leave you to your family in the evening, then. Final festival. Committee meeting at 8 tomorrow morning. Don't forget." After Catherine's departure, Abigail completed her closing routine one-handed, Michael having fallen asleep against her shoulder, while Lily examined a colorful patchwork ball from the small collection of toys kept at the infirmary. The simple domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly. How far she had come from the desperate widow who had arrived on the stagecoach half a year earlier. With the twins settled and the infirmary secured, Abigail made her way down Main Street, toward the mercantile. Goldenfield's residents greeted her warmly as she passed, Reverend Collins tipping his hat, Mrs. Sullivan pausing in her errands for a brief conversation about upcoming charitable work, miners nodding respectfully. The acceptance she had fought to earn through professional competence had deepened into genuine community integration. A group of women from the newly formed Ladies' Benevolent Society called out invitations to their next meeting, where they would be sewing winter garments for mining families in need. Abigail served as the group's vice president, her medical knowledge proving invaluable in identifying those most requiring assistance. The transition from outsider to community leader had occurred so gradually she had barely noticed it happening. The mercantile stood as it had since her arrival, though the sign now read Blackwell and Sons General Supply, a forward-looking amendment Matthew had made after their marriage. Inside, the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and various dry goods mingled in a comforting blend. The store was Empty of customers at this late hour, with only Matthew visible at the back counter, head bent over ledgers. He looked up at the sound of the door, his serious expression immediately warming. "There's my family." He set down his pencil and came around the counter, taking Lily from Abigail's arms and pressing a kiss to her forehead before leaning in to do the same for his wife. "How was your day?" "Productive. 6 patients, including 2 children with seasonal coughs and a complex hand laceration." Abigail shifted Michael to a more comfortable position against her shoulder. "Catherine brought the medical texts from Sacramento." Excellent timing with Dr. Henderson's visit approaching. Matthew guided them toward the back stairs that led to a small apartment above the store, their first home as a family before they had moved to the larger house on Oak Street. They still used the apartment for midday meals and occasional overnight stays when work kept them late in town. The simple rooms had been transformed since Abigail first saw them, now featuring cheerful curtains, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, 2 fitted with special platforms for the twins, and a small but functional kitchen area. Mrs. Franklin had prepared a cold supper before taking her leave, the food waiting under cloth covers. They settled into their familiar routine, transferring the sleeping Michael to a small cot while Lily happily explored her surroundings. Matthew poured cider while Abigail arranged the meal, the domestic partnership, as natural as their professional one had become. "The assayer's report arrived from the Trinity site," Matthew mentioned as they sat down to eat. "August yields exceeded projections by 12%. That should please the investors," Abigail noted, "and stabilize funding for the infirmary expansion." "Indeed," Matthew smiled at her over his cup, "though I'm equally pleased by another piece of news that arrived on today's stage. The Territorial Medical Board has approved your formal registration as a physician's assistant under Dr. Henderson's supervision." Abigail's hand froze halfway to her plate. "Truly? I didn't expect a decision for at least another month. It seems your reputation has spread beyond Goldenfield." Matthew produced an official-looking letter from his pocket. Dr. Henderson's recommendation carried significant weight, as did testimonials from Mayor Peterson and, surprisingly, Harriet Sullivan. Examining the document with trembling fingers, Abigail felt a wave of vindication wash over her. The credential represented not just professional recognition, but the culmination of a dream that had begun in her father's Boston practice. A dream she had nearly abandoned after Edward's death, believing it incompatible with widowhood and motherhood. "It changes everything," she whispered. "With official standing, I can expand treatments, access additional medicines, perhaps even train others eventually." "I never doubted you would achieve it." Matthew's voice held such certainty that Abigail looked up from the document to meet his gaze. "From the moment you reset Joseph's leg without flinching, I knew you were meant for this work." Their eyes held across the table, the connection between them deepening as it had steadily since their first meeting. Their marriage had begun with practical foundations, respect, shared purpose, mutual support, but had blossomed into something far richer, a love built on true partnership rather than romantic illusion. "I have something for you as well," Abigail said, reaching into her pocket for a small package wrapped in plain paper. "An early anniversary gift, though perhaps premature by several months." Matthew accepted it with a quizzical expression, carefully, unwrapping the simple gift to reveal a pair of tiny knitted booties. For a moment he stared at them uncomprehendingly. Then understanding dawned, his eyes widening as they lifted to her face. "Abigail, are you certain?" She nodded, joy bubbling up at his reaction. "Dr. Henderson confirmed my suspicions last month when he visited. The baby should arrive in early spring, around the anniversary of my arrival in Goldenfield." Matthew was around the table in an instant, kneeling beside her chair to take her hands in his. "A baby," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Our baby, joining our family." His fingers brushed gently against her still, flat stomach, wonder in his expression. For a man typically so composed, the naked emotion on his face moved Abigail deeply. This child would enter a family already built on love and acceptance, with siblings eager to welcome a new playmate, and a father whose capacity for devotion seemed limitless. A rather fitting completion to our unusual beginning, don't you think? Abigail smiled, touching his cheek gently. From mail-order bride to mother of 3 in the span of a year. He laughed, the sound rich with happiness. When you put it that way, our story does seem rather extraordinary. Life rarely follows the paths we anticipate, Abigail observed, thinking of the desperate woman who had boarded a stagecoach with twin babies and fragile hopes. Sometimes, the detours lead to better destinations than we could have planned. The following day dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for Goldenfield's Harvest Festival. The entire settlement had turned out in holiday attire. Main Street transformed with decorations crafted from autumn bounty. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributions. Children darted about in organized games, and a small band of local musicians tuned their instruments on the dancing platform. The community had embraced the festival with characteristic frontier enthusiasm, transforming a simple harvest celebration into a showcase of Goldenfield's evolution from mining camp to established settlement. A banner stretched across Main Street proclaimed Goldenfield Harvest Festival 1852 in bold letters, while vendors from surrounding communities had arrived with wares rarely seen in the remote location. Fabric from San Francisco, tools from Sacramento, even exotic fruits transported at considerable expense to mark the special occasion. Abigail stood with Catherine near the refreshment table, supervising the twins as they explored the festivities with wide-eyed wonder. Michael had already accumulated a collection of small treasures, a pine cone, a bright feather, a smooth stone offered by an indulgent miner, while Lily observed the musicians with studious concentration. "You're glowing," Catherine remarked quietly. "I suspect your news won't remain secret much longer. Mrs. Sullivan has already commented twice on how well you're looking." Abigail laughed softly. "I'd hoped to wait a bit longer before making an announcement, but I fear you're right. Nothing stays private long in Goldenfield. Especially not when it involves the town's most prominent family," Catherine teased, adjusting her festive bonnet. "Though I must say, motherhood suits you beautifully. Who would have imagined that the exhausted widow who arrived on the stage in March would be the cornerstone of Goldenfield society by autumn?" "There's Joseph," Catherine murmured, nodding toward the edge of the gathering. Joseph Blackwell made his way slowly through the crowd, leaning heavily on an ornate cane. Though still handsome in a distinguished way, his illness had aged him considerably, silver now dominating the hair at his temples. He nodded politely to those who greeted him, maintaining the careful facade of the respected town founder who had magnanimously stepped back from leadership. Abigail watched his approach with composed neutrality. Their interaction since her marriage to Matthew had been minimal and strictly formal, governed by unspoken agreement to maintain peace for Matthew's sake. Joseph had never explicitly acknowledged his abandonment of their original arrangement, nor apologized for his public insinuations about her character. In return, she had never publicly revealed the full extent of his fabrications regarding the Trinity venture. "Mrs. Blackwell," Joseph greeted her with a small bow. "Miss Wells, a fine day for celebration." "Indeed," Abigail replied evenly. "The town has much to appreciate this harvest season." Joseph's gaze drifted to the twins playing nearby, his expression unreadable. "They've grown considerably since their arrival." "Children tend to do that," Catherine observed dryly, her protective instincts toward Abigail evident in her tone. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Matthew appeared, carrying cups of cider. He nodded to his brother with practiced civility. "Joseph, good to see you well enough to attend. Wouldn't miss Goldenfield's first harvest festival, Joseph replied, particularly since the idea originated from my earlier suggestion to the town council. It was a typical Joseph claim, transforming someone else's innovation into his own contribution after the fact. Matthew merely smiled, having long ago accepted his brother's need to position himself at the center of community achievements. "I believe Mayor Peterson is about to begin the opening ceremonies," Matthew observed, offering Abigail his arm. "Shall we find seats?" As they moved toward the central gathering, Joseph's voice stopped them. "A moment, if you would." They turned, back, Abigail instinctively gathering the twins closer. Joseph seemed to struggle internally before speaking again. "I've been offered a position with a mining consortium in San Francisco," he said finally. "Consulting work, advising on new ventures. My experience apparently holds value to certain investors." "When would you leave?" Matthew asked, surprise evident in his voice. "After the new year. The position includes suitable accommodation and compensation." Joseph's gaze met Abigail's briefly. "It seems an appropriate time for fresh beginnings all around." The subtext was clear. He had heard about her pregnancy, news that had apparently traveled through Goldenfield's efficient gossip network. His departure represented not just a professional opportunity, but a tacit acknowledgement that the town could only comfortably accommodate one Blackwell family, and that position had been definitively claimed. "San Francisco offers many opportunities," Abigail said carefully. "Your consulting experience would indeed be valuable there." Joseph nodded, accepting this diplomatic response for the closure it represented. With a final glance at the twins, the children he had initially promised to welcome before gold fever redirected his ambitions, he turned and made his way to a seat of honor near the platform, separate from the family he had once expected to. "Uhid." As they settled into their own seats, Matthew covered Abigail's hand with his. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously, watching Joseph interact with the town council members. The man who had inadvertently brought her to California through promises unkept was moving on, closing the chapter that had begun with desperate letters exchanged across a continent. "I am," she realized, the truth of it settling comfortably in her heart. More than all right. Mayor Peterson took the platform, launching into his speech about community growth and shared prosperity. Abigail only half listened, her attention focused instead on the living results of her unexpected journey. Her thriving children, the infirmary she had built, the husband whose partnership had grown from respect into profound love, and the new life developing beneath her heart. She had arrived as a mail-order bride, seeking simple security, only to discover something far more valuable: the opportunity to build a life defined by her own choices and capabilities, rather than by circumstance or convention. The gold that had drawn so many to California had proven elusive and transitory for most, but Abigail had found lasting treasure in the most unexpected of places: a second chance at family, purpose, and love in the unlikeliest of settings. As the mayor concluded his remarks and music filled the air, Matthew leaned close. "Dance with me?" he asked, nodding toward the platform where couples were already gathering. "What about the children?" Abigail glanced at the twins, who were contentedly sharing a sweet roll under Catherine's watchful eye. "They're well tended," Matthew assured her, rising and offering his hand. "One dance with my wife before duty calls us back to parenthood." Abigail accepted his hand, allowing him to lead her toward the platform. As they took their positions among the other dancers, she caught sight of Joseph watching them from his seat, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his features before he looked away. Once, that glimpse might have stirred regret or resentment. Now it evoked only a fleeting acknowledgement of paths not taken and the unexpected blessings that had emerged from disappointment. As the music swelled and Matthew's arms encircled her, Abigail surrendered to the moment, embracing the future they were building together. a future far richer and more fulfilling than any she could have envisioned when she first stepped off the stagecoach into Goldenfield's dusty main street. Around them, the community celebrated harvest bounty and frontier resilience, unaware that they were witnessing something equally precious, the flowering of a love story that had begun not with romantic passion but with mutual respect, grown through shared challenges and matured into a partnership strong enough to weather whatever the unpredictable California territory might bring next. As the dance ended, Matthew kept hold of her hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. Abigail's smile answered before her words. "Completely." The festival continued around them, the community, coming together in celebration of shared accomplishment and common purpose. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit throughout Main Street, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. The children's choir performed their harvest song to enthusiastic applause, young Amy Peterson's serious dedication drawing particular admiration. In a quiet moment, standing with Matthew's arm around her shoulders and the twins drowsing against Mrs. Franklin's chest nearby, Abigail found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. The desperate letters exchanged with a stranger, the journey across a continent with infant twins, the crushing disappointment upon arrival, all had seemed like disasters at the time. Yet each apparent setback had ultimately led her toward authentic happiness built on her own terms. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "That life's detours often lead to better destinations than the ones we plan," she replied, leaning into his embrace as the stars appeared above Goldenfield, a community that had become truly her home. In the distance, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the darkening sky. Not gold to be mined from unyielding earth, but a moment of natural beauty to be shared and remembered. Abigail watched it fade, content in the knowledge that while gold fever had drawn thousands to California's wilderness, she had found a richer treasure, a life of purpose, a family built on choice rather than convention, and a love that had grown, naturally from respect and partnership, into something as enduring as the mountains that cradled their town. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.